very easy to just hand over a whole 5 weeks of teaching. But she specifically asked me about this series. And I was very excited because honestly, guys, Shape changed my life. Shape changed my life, and it's my prayer, it's my hope that when we walk together in the next 5 weeks, and as we're coming out of that, that you also take away what the Lord has for you. So the series is called Shape. Thank you for the little introduction. Shape is an acronym. And I think I might say it in the bulletin too, but the S is for spiritual gifts. H is for heart passion or heart desire. The A is for your abilities. The P is for your personality. And the E is for your experiences. And so these first 2 weeks are going to be a little background that Priscilla and Rachel asked me to give before moving into the letters. And then the last 3 weeks, we're going to move through each of the letters. And it is originally a workshop. And so that is why it's not like a sermon. And so that's why we're meeting around tables, because this will be a little bit different than what we usually do. The first 2 weeks will feel, I think, kind of familiar, but the last 3 weeks will be much more workshop style. And so you could probably say this along with me, but on Sundays we are here to be equipped, right? And equipping, what do they always say? What does Rachel and Priscilla Madison always say? We're equipped to go, to love, and to serve. So you've heard them say that a ton of times, right? But have you ever wondered, okay, I know what going is, serving, loving, but like, what does that actually look like? What does that actually look like in my life, in my work week, in all the places that I spend time? And so that is what this series is for, and it's my prayer that the Lord will show you in a more specific way what going, serving, and loving looks like based on how God made you and the experiences that He's put in your life. Next slide. So this is a little cartoon in the back. In case you can't see, it says, it's a picture of a pastor in front of a congregation, and he's saying, I want all of you to feel free to get really vulnerable with each other. But then everybody has a mask on with like a fake smiley face. So I like this cartoon because that's might be what some of you are thinking. And I just want to acknowledge that, right? Vulnerability is not easy. I'm hoping that these first couple of weeks, it's like an ease into the next 3 weeks, and hopefully that's not scary. But I just want to recognize, I just want to recognize that you may be saying, well, you're not vulnerable with me, so why do I have to be vulnerable with other people? I hear you. I get that. And I'll be sharing some of my testimony today. And in these first 2 weeks, I hope and pray that maybe eventually we will get to the point of sharing more. So I just want to acknowledge that some of you may be feeling this way in this cartoon. And another thing before we get started, does anybody know what those presents are about? I walked in and I saw these presents, and like, did somebody leave it over from last week? Did anybody? Is there a party? Anyway, I mean, 3 of them look like they might be birthday, but one of them is like a mashup of a baby shower and Christmas. Does anybody want to? You think we should open them? Yes. Sure. Can I have? I think there's 4. Anybody want to volunteer to open them? I don't really want to open them because I don't know what's inside them. What does it say?
What skills or abilities do you have? Go use them to benefit someone in your community.
Yeah. Okay. Does that feel like a present? Does that feel like a gift? I don't know.
Looks like a question.
It is a question, yeah. And sometimes I don't really feel like using my abilities when I'm tired. Okay, all right, Shelby, what do you think? I don't know, that's the biggest one, I think. Oh, money. What does it say? What does the Post-it note say? Treat yourself. All right. $1. That's like a Slurpee, right? A Slurpee at 7-Eleven. Oh, what did you guys get?
Give that to someone who needs it.
Oh, how much money is that?
$20.
$20. And give it to somebody who needs it. Does that feel like a gift? Huh. Oh no, what did you get, Mike?
I got one that said, you are loved.
Oh. Does that feel like a gift? That's a little illustration that we will come back to in a bit. And now is for your first little pair share. So next slide. Okay, so in either a pair, somebody sitting next to you, or maybe a group of three, if there's an uneven number, whoever is closest to you, there's 3 questions that just to get us thinking about the theme. So the first question is, how familiar are you with calling, the word calling in the Bible? How familiar are you on a scale of 1? I don't even know what that means. It's weird. And 10 is, I've heard this 100 times. I know what this is. Next question is, what ideas or images come to your mind when you think about the word grace? Are there ideas or images that come to mind with the word grace? And if not, that's okay. And then the last one, this might be a little vulnerable. Was there a time when you experienced grace in your life? Or was there a time in your life when you did not experience grace? You felt like there was a lack of grace and you wish you had grace. So we're only going to do this for maybe 3 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm going to have my little timer, so go ahead. I just wanted to get us thinking a little bit about some of these words that we're going to be talking about and using a lot. And you've also heard Rachel, Priscilla, and Madison say this all the time, Kaleo, right? It's the Greek word for called. It's part of our namesake. It's part of our identity being here. And called, and that's for everybody, right? Like regardless if you are here, Kaleo is your home or might be your home. It's for everybody. Calling is for everybody. And so the next 2 weeks, we're going to be going through what does calling mean? And there's 2 different kinds of calling. Next slide. So there are two types of calling. One of them is for everybody. Every single person in the whole world. That's called general calling. And the second kind of calling is more specific. It is the calling that God made just for you, unique to you. And so this first week, we're going to be focusing on general calling. And there are some things that God calls every single person to. Every single person. And that is being called to God and your identity as a child of God. And then also being called to others. And so we're going to go through each of those a little bit. Next slide. Okay, so this is a quote that I found. I like to read, and I felt like it resonated as I was thinking about sharing some of my testimony this morning. This is a quote from James Baldwin. James Baldwin was an author and also a leader in the civil rights movement. I'll read the quote for us. It says, "We are afraid to love because we are afraid of exposing our true selves. To manage our fear, we invent meaningless categories of identity, and we other groups of people we don't belong to in order to avoid reckoning with ourselves." I'm going to read it again. "We are afraid to love because we are afraid of exposing our true selves. To manage that fear, we invent meaningless categories of identity, and we other the groups we don't belong to in order to avoid reckoning with ourselves." So I don't know, maybe that resonates with you, maybe that makes you feel uncomfortable. Next slide. It made me think about Lego Batman. I really like the movie Lego Batman. Hopefully you've seen it. Right, Lego Batman, and I guess regular Batman. I haven't seen as many of those movies, regular Batman movies, but he likes to be in his house alone, and it's dark. And this is a picture of Lego Batman. He's sitting in front of his microwave, just watching his food heat up in the microwave, and he's just watching it turn and turn, his lobster thermidor. And he lives in this big house all by himself, right? And he doesn't want anybody to come into his life. He doesn't need him. He's awesome. He's Batman by himself. And he also doesn't really care about his villains at first either, right? He's like, I don't need you, Joker. I don't need you, all these other villains. He's like, I'm awesome by myself. And eventually, in the movie, he learns that he actually does need people. But that resonated with me. Because when I first met Jesus, I was afraid. I was so afraid of the burdens that I was carrying. I was afraid of admitting that my life was a mess. But I wanted to hide that, right? I didn't want people to see that my life was a mess because I thought everybody else's life was fine. I didn't want to admit my true feelings because that feels gross, right? Like, it can feel, gross when other people see that you're hurting. So I didn't want to admit how much hurt I was feeling. So I am an only child. I have no siblings. And from a young age, I started caring for my mother. My mother had a chronic disease that she had MS that ultimately took her life, but ultimately took away her ability to walk, her ability to use her hands. And so the whole time I ever knew my mother, she was either in like quad canes, and then eventually she was in a wheelchair all the time. And I was the one taking care of her because I had no siblings, and my dad couldn't handle it. So I felt very alone because I didn't know any other kids that had a mom that was in a wheelchair. And I felt like it was my fault somehow that my parents always fought and were always yelling. Felt like it was my fault that my dad was never home at night, that he just worked all the time. I felt like it was my fault that they were getting a divorce, that somehow I had control over all that. That was a lie. It was a lie that was a hold in my mind. And at school, I created these categories of people because everybody else looked fine, right? My classmates, they were happy-go-lucky. They had tons of siblings. Their families would all get together and have a great time. But making those assumptions of other people, that was another lie that had a hold in my mind. I would try to hide any of the school occasions from my parents, except like the required ones, like grades and stuff, like, because I didn't want my parents to go to school with me. It was way too difficult to get my mom even to the school because school wasn't very well handicap accessible. And the few times that they actually would be with me at a school function, I always felt like everybody was staring at me. I always felt like, oh, they're judging me. They have no idea everything that goes on in our house. And I assumed that everybody was afraid of my dad, and that was a little bit legitimate because some of my friends told me they were afraid of my dad. I also grew up in a Mennonite community, so not Amish. I didn't have horses, so like one step out, but still Mennonite. And so everybody's related. And you know who's related to who because of the last names, and so works with somebody else and has for 50 years. And so everybody, it's nice when you're in that community because you have a big family, but my last name, not a Mennonite last name. And we weren't related to anybody that was. And so I always felt like I stood out in that way. And that was another fake category of how I thought about people. But God. I felt like, I couldn't really be a kid because I was taking care of my mom, didn't really know what it was like to be a kid. But the first summer that I got to go to summer camp, it was like heaven. It was like, what do you mean that I can like eat candy and like run around and like jump in the lake and do all the things that kids were supposed to do? It was amazing, and that's where I came to meet Jesus at summer camp. My counselors and my friends that I met there, I realized that I was not alone. And when I first met Jesus and I welcomed him into my life, it literally felt like, if anybody does yoga and you feel like you can all of a sudden like stand up straight, that's how it felt. It felt like all of a sudden, like all this burden, all this pain, it was just off my shoulders. It was pure relief and peace. And so that is an example of one of our general callings. God is drawing every person into himself. Every person into knowing who they are as a child of God. And so the scripture we're going to be looking at, next slide, is Galatians, because Galatians talks a lot about these different types of callings, and so that's why I picked it, because it was all in one nice little compact place. So we're going to be in the book of Galatians, because this is also, it was a letter written to a group of people who had also just welcomed Jesus into their life. Now, I'm going to be kind of hopping through the chapters because we don't have time to read the whole thing, unfortunately. Maybe someday we will. But the whole book fits into what we're talking about, and so I've already done the study, and so I'm pulling out things to highlight for you. But I highly encourage you, like Rachel does, to go home and to read it yourselves. And to help you, I put a little outline in the bulletin, like by chapter and by verse to help orient you. Because sometimes when you're reading through, you're like, I'm lost, I don't know where I'm at. And so that outline is meant to help you work through each section. And like I said, what I'm doing, it was just a crazy thing. So in school in the spring, God must have known that I would need this because I had to pick a project, and some of what I'm presenting the next 2 weeks is what I was working on, and I guess God knew I needed to know it. The other reason why I'm going to encourage you to go and read it yourself is because while we're going to be highlighting certain things, ultimately, what we need to do is we need to look at the whole of Scripture. And you hear Pastor Rachel say this, like you need to read what's before the verse, you need to read what's after the verse. Sometimes you got to go to a different book to understand it. And so, because there's a wholeness that when we focus on one thing, we can accidentally misunderstand it. Wanted to mention that. So, first, let's set the stage here. Let's set the stage of what's happening. So, Galatians is a letter who was written by a guy named Paul, and he was traveling to different churches to plant churches and to tell people about Jesus. And this letter was written to people who lived in a region called Galatia. It wasn't written to one city, it was written to a region. And so this slide, go back to my map slide. Yeah, this slide is a map to kind of help orient you. It's a map of Europe. So like Spain is all the way on the left, and Italy is the little boot here. And Galatia was all the way over here in the red, towards like the Middle East, towards today it is modern Turkey. They estimate modern Turkey, and that's a picture of modern Turkey up there. And so the audience, so these people, some of them were new Christians. They had just met Jesus, and they had recently responded to God's call to believe and to accept that they were children of God. And they used to be pagans, so they used to worship like the tree and the squirrel and the sky and whatever other random god, but came to accept that God was the one true God. And the first thing that they might have noticed about this letter is that there are portions of this letter that Paul is writing in all caps. If Paul was on socials, it would have been that person who types in all caps. You're like, why are they talking about this in all caps? He wrote portions of the letter in his own handwriting, and he wrote it in all capital letters because he was literally trying to shout at them through the letter. And he's shouting from a place, he's really calling them out. He's like reprimanding them, like, what are you doing? And he's shouting because he's coming from a place of deep concern. He cares about them. He wants them to grow. But he's frustrated because they've fallen into believing a lie. And so he's writing in all caps about this. Next slide. So there are, go back to the last one. Yep. Galatians, the whole book of Galatians has two themes about calling. And the first one is God's family is open to all people. Every person ever created on this earth, God's family is open to everyone. And then the second ties into the series we were just coming out of, Pastor Rachel talking about acting up, living like we believe, and that's the other theme, is living like we believe that God's family is open to every person. So we're going to start at Galatians 1, verses 6 through 7. So Galatians 1, the first 5 verses is basically just Paul saying hi, hello, peace. And then he starts absolutely like laying into them. Verses 6 and 7. I am in the New Living Translation because I think the words are a little bit more easy to digest. So Paul says, I am shocked that you are turning away so soon from God, who called you to God through the grace of Christ. You are following a different way that pretends to be the good news, but it is not the good news at all. You are being fooled by those deliberately twisting the truth concerning Christ. And so what is happening here? There were some other teachers. So Paul, he was traveling, and so he stayed in Galatia for a little while, but then he had to move on and go somewhere else. And there were some other teachers that had been traveling, and they came and they stayed with the Galatians, and they ended up adding some things to the gospel that Paul wasn't never mentioned, wasn't included. And those teachers, we have to remember that Christianity was originally shared, and the good news about Christ was originally shared with the Jewish people. And so these teachers, they had previously, they had the Jewish background. And they ended up adding some things that Paul had never taught. And so Paul's like, what are you doing? Why are you listening to these people who had just added some stuff? So what did they add? They were telling the believers that everyone needed basically to act like them in their behavior. So people of Jewish heritage who became believers and accepted Christ, some of them still followed some of the old laws about what food to eat, how to keep clean, purity laws. Some of them still followed those laws. And there's a whole background about why that is, and we don't have time for that today, but they ended up adding those extra behaviors, those extra laws. They were telling people, okay, in order for you to believe in Christ, well, you still have to eat this certain food and be clean this certain way. But Paul had never said that. And what ultimately ended up happening is that people wouldn't eat meals together. They would eat on different sides of the building. It would be like everybody's coming in for family worship Sunday, and half of us are sitting over here, and half of us are sitting here, just because I decided to eat something. I decided to eat bacon or something. Like, that's basically what's happening. And Paul's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? We were all eating all together as a family. And so the next section we're going to highlight, this is what Paul is talking about in chapter 2, verses 11 to 21. He goes through this whole thing about, like, this is what happened before. And I'm just going to read a couple verses. Peter was another disciple, another teacher that Paul knew. When Peter came to Antioch, a different city, not in Galatia, I had to oppose him to his face, for what he did was very wrong. When he first arrived, he ate with the Gentile believers who were not circumcised. But then afterwards, some other friends of James came, and then Peter would meet with them. He was afraid of criticism from these people who insisted somehow that the necessity of circumcision. As a result, other Jewish believers ended up following in this hypocrisy, and then even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not following the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter in front of all the others, since you, a Jew by birth, have discarded the Jewish laws, you know that we can set those aside now, and are living like Gentiles, why are you now trying to make these Gentiles follow your traditions? That's verses 11, 12, 13. And so this is what Paul is really upset about, and he is really upset about it. Teaching that everyone had to act like them was not at all what he had originally said. He said, we are called to God through the grace of Christ, and that's it. So this word grace, we started to think about it a little bit at the beginning. We use the word grace a lot, right? We throw it around, church world, grace a lot. But sometimes I feel like we lose track of what it really means. Like, do you ever say a word like 1,000 times and you're like, I don't even know what this means? And so some of what we're going to be doing the next 2 weeks is revisiting, okay, what does grace really mean? And I want to point out a couple things that I'm guessing might be lingering in your head, some initial ideas about grace. So for myself, I am a recovering workaholic and a recovering perfectionist. And I often think about school assignments, right? You're in school and you're supposed to have something done, you don't have it done. And sometimes the teacher will give you grace if they feel like being nice, or there's some crazy circumstance you can't finish. But as a perfectionist, I never, ever allowed myself to ask for extensions. They give us extensions in seminary, I still can't even ask for one. I never allowed myself to ask for grace or help when I need it. And so based on what I said earlier, the dysfunction in my family, the dysfunction with my parents, that only fueled my perfectionism even more, right? Made it even worse, because I was like, oh, if only I can do this thing, but I could never actually do the thing, right? But if only I could be better, I could fix all my parents' problems. And one time a counselor, so I've gone to mental health counseling on and off in my life, and one time a counselor said to me, she's like, do you ever give yourself grace? And I was like,
Probably not.
didn't really know what to say. And that's what I said to her. I was like, I think I need to go home now because now I need to think about, do I ever give myself grace? Because I was thinking, God's always the one who's giving grace, right? But sometimes God can feel so different, but do I ever give so distant? Do I ever give myself grace? I couldn't have an answer. So maybe you're thinking of a teacher, maybe you're thinking of the police, maybe you're thinking of your parents in the situations you're reflecting on. Maybe your parents found you after you were hitting your brother or something and you weren't supposed to, or the cops, right? You're speeding, but somehow they just decide to not give you a ticket, right? So it ends up being like a person who's holding back a consequence, right? Holding back a consequence for your bad behavior. Maybe that's what some of you are thinking grace is. That's how I thought about grace. I always felt like it wasn't realistic, that I wasn't going to get grace, so why ask for it anyway? Somehow it was my fault that I didn't deserve it. And maybe you are just trying to survive. You don't even know what grace is anymore because nobody's ever given you grace in your life. And so let's talk about grace. Next, yes. So what is grace? Grace is one of God's characteristics. One of God's characteristics, and grace is the basis of our salvation. So what does that really mean? Okay, basis of salvation. Grace is like basis, we can think about like a foundation or like a mechanism by which we can have salvation. Okay, what do we mean by salvation? All right, so I had to look up our little Wesleyan online book. So salvation is accepting Jesus' lordship in your life, recognizing that there's a separation between you and God that you can never fill, repenting from that, and then you're regenerated. You're made a totally new person. I had all those burdens lifted off of me. Grace. That's how all that happens. Next slide. Romans 5:20-21. God's law was given so that all people could see how sinful they were. But as people sinned more and more, God's wonderful grace became even more abundant. Next slide. Just so as sin ruled over all people and brought them to death, now God's wonderful grace rules instead, giving us right standing with God and resulting in eternal life through Jesus Christ, our Lord. We are saved by faith, by grace, through faith. And maybe there's a second idea about grace that you might be thinking of. And so I just want to acknowledge that. You may have heard people talking about salvation as like a transaction where there's like a debt that needs to be paid. You owe God something because at the beginning, way at the beginning, Adam and Eve, right, they chose something that wasn't God. And so they created this separation. And that ultimately dishonored God because God is big and mighty and you can't dishonor God like that. So there was always a debt or something needed to be done in order to get rid of that separation, to make the relationship right again. And so this line of thinking about God's grace also relates to like Jesus paid the debt owed in him being killed on the cross, hung on the tree, and died, right? God's law was given so that all people could see how sinful they were. And so in some sense, this is what the Galatians, these teachers were saying to the Galatians, right? They're focusing on this law, and they were thinking, but at the same time, they were also relying on their heritage, what was familiar to them, and then putting those expectations on other people. And so Paul wanted to correct that. And this concept of like debt and punishment, hear me correctly, like there is some of the Bible that does say that. But it's a concept that if we are not careful, if we overemphasize this punishment, if we overemphasize the debt that is owed, if that's the only way we talk about grace, we accidentally end up distorting what the Bible says. Because the Bible talks about grace in a lot of other ways too. And so we need that whole picture. We need that whole picture, right? Instead of only focusing on one part. Next slide. So some of that language about debts and punishment was written, rewritten, and emphasized by this dude. He lived a long time ago. He was a monk. He basically, all he did was eat, sleep, do some work, study the Bible. That's all he did. He studied the Bible a lot, and he wrote about the Bible a lot. And he wrote about grace as being saved from punishment or debt. And this language has become so common in church today because over time, people look back at the same historical references of, okay, this guy, he lived a long time ago, closer to Jesus being alive than me, so let's rely on him as a resource. Let's rely on him as a resource to think about this. But like I said, overemphasis of that has done harm. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a church environment where you leave and you feel terrible. Like there's a fear and there's a guilt and they're trying to coerce you to do something. That's not good. That is the overemphasis I'm talking about. It's not the full picture of grace. Did you know, and this is something I just learned this past spring from studying, did you know that if you look at all the times Paul ever talks about grace, only 10% of the times that he's talking about grace is he talking about it in the terms of being saved from a debt or a punishment. Only 10% of the times. What happened to the other 90% of the times that he's talking about grace? What is he talking about in the other 90%? And so that's some of what we're working through today. And that's also a reason why we say it over and over again. We always have to go back to the Word. We always have to go back to the Word and read the fullness. What does this full thing say? Okay, next slide. So what is grace? Grace is gift. So the original Greek word that Paul chose to talk about grace, it's a feminine noun. It's charis. It's approximately the right pronunciation, but it's the same word as gift. So what was Paul thinking about? He could have chose a lot of different words, but why did he choose the word gift to talk about grace? And so the first thing we need to remember, right, is that Paul is Jewish. He had a Jewish heritage, and he was familiar with all the stories of creation, of how God had walked with his people through time. So if grace is one of those characteristics, God existed at the beginning of time, at the beginning of this world, that means grace existed for you and I at the beginning of time. Grace has always existed before we were ever born, before we could even think or make a choice about whether to follow God, whether to believe this stuff in the Bible. God already had the grace for that. God chose to give us life at creation. God chose the Hebrew people. And if you read through that Old Testament, you know how many times they're doing something crazy, stupid, or something they thought was right but wasn't quite what God said. And God keeps coming back. He keeps coming back because he has that grace. And then Jesus is ultimately a fulfillment of that relationship and that covenant that God made. The second thing about grace. Sorry, I'm adjusting my slides. Okay, yep, that's good. Thank you. The second thing we need to think about, Galatians 1:13-16, we're going to go back to. And so Paul starts to explain what he means by grace as gift, and he starts to tell his testimony. Verses 13-16, you know what I was like when I followed the Jewish religion, how violently I persecuted God's church. I did my best to destroy it. I was far ahead of my fellow Jews in my zeal for the traditions and the ancestors, but even before I was born, God chose me, and he called me by his marvelous grace. Then it pleased him to reveal his son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. Grace, reading that, Paul killed tons of people, either himself personally or he ordered tons of people killed. He was not a good dude at all. And yet, God chose him. God chose him from the beginning of time to bring this gospel ultimately to us, because we're technically Gentiles, because we're not Jewish by heritage, right? Grace is given regardless of worth or status, how many people you've killed, places you've been, people you've been with. It doesn't matter, because the grace is always there. Third thing we need to know when we think about grace. Paul is Jewish, right? So we need to think about what gift giving looks like in the Jewish culture. Gift giving in the Jewish culture was a two-way street. It was relational. They always expected, if I'm giving you a gift, you're giving me a gift. You never, ever, ever received a gift without expecting to give something back, ever. And that's a little different from us, right? This is one of those cultural differences that we need to be paying attention to. Because in the U.S., with us, right, we think about Christmas, right? Is anybody giving gifts to Santa? Is anybody giving gifts to Santa? No. You might give it to the reindeer because they're cute, give them a cookie and a carrot. Like baby showers, housewarming parties. You give a gift, are you expecting that new mom to give you a gift back? Nope. Nope. Birthday parties when you're a kid, you're giving gifts. Sure, that person, cool, you might get cake and some favors, but we don't always expect something back when we give gifts. But we already read verses 15 to 16. Even before I was born, God chose me. Next slide. Okay. Even before I was born, God chose me and called me by his marvelous grace's gift. Then it pleased him to reveal his son to me so that I would proclaim the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles. And I have some little but big words underlined here. Then and so that. God calls us to experience him. God calls us to others to give something back to God and to other people. So this calling to others is something we're going to talk more about in the coming weeks, but this is a little bit of an introduction. And so that is our general calling again, right? Our general calling is God calls and draws all people to know himself, to know their identity as a child of God. And God also calls us to others. So when Paul heard these teachers saying that they couldn't all eat together because some people weren't following the Jewish laws and saying things like, in order to be with us, you need to behave like us, he was pissed. He was pissed. Because people were falling for this lie. And remember, though, with a little sympathy, remember that the Jewish people, they were God's chosen people. It was an ethnic religion. They were all Jewish. God had chosen specifically them originally. And so in their heritage, they were thinking, what do you mean? What do you mean? We are your chosen people. What do you mean that we have to open the door and have all these people be at our family meals? They didn't quite understand that, right? And in Eastern cultures, Jewish culture, there's this value of community, this value of social ties. That's another difference that we don't completely have here in the U.S. Paul was thinking, wait a minute. We all ate happy-go-lucky together, and now what? He's like, that I was called to be with all these people. I wasn't called to be with just you. I was called to be with all these Gentile people. And you are also called by the same grace, that same gift. So why are you creating this false separation that doesn't need to be there? He ultimately ended up creating classes, like a class system in the church. So believers who are called through grace to others, we are one single family with diverse members. The gospel becomes manifest. So the gospel becomes living and active. That Bible is alive and it's living with us in reality. Anytime a group of people who would otherwise be separated by religion, by culture, by social class, anytime this family comes together and we eat together at the same table. That's one of the reasons why I love Family Worship Sundays. In Western cultures, like here in the U.S., we don't have that concept of social ties. We might accept God's grace, but then we're just like, yay, I'm feeling good today. I'm going to sit here with this grace. But do we always do something with it? Do we share it with other people, or do we hoard it for ourselves? We've lost this part of our salvation that is family-driven and it's community-wide. And in the Gospels, when you read the Gospels, look at the times that someone has accepted Jesus as Lord, and then they immediately go home and everybody in their household is saved. That was something I always wondered about. I was like, what do you mean? All these people all of a sudden believe this thing? But that's how tightly they valued community, family, and social ties. And that's something I still don't fully get yet. It's something I'm still learning about. And so what does all this mean for us? Next slide. All people are called to God and their identity as a child of God and others. Checking the time. Okay. Earlier, I shared a really quick snapshot of my testimony when I was little. And that was when I was like about 10, went to summer camp for the first time. Now I'm going to fast forward to when I'm 19 and I'm in college. And I had what John Wesley would call like a second salvation experience, or like a sanctification experience. And that's a big word, right? And Rachel has explained this a little bit before, but sanctification is when we are gradually, over time, becoming more and more like Jesus because we surrender a little bit more and a little bit more each day. And so I had a second experience that I was like fully awakened to my new self. Okay, so graduated high school in 2008. And I remember our graduation speaker was talking about a lot of things, but one thing that stuck out to me, it was kind of like background noise in my life, was if the world is ever going to be a better place, it's up to all y'all. It's up to you to make the world a better place. And that was like a whole vibe. That was like an emphasis throughout my like high school. And that only fed, right, before I said I was a recovering perfectionist and a recovering workaholic, right? And so it put this emphasis on, like, what am I going to do? Oh, the world's a mess. What am I going to do? And I cared about people, right? So I wanted to help people. But then I had to deal with this, like, family background, trying to figure this out. I went away to college, and I was so excited because I was finally out of the house. And my mom had at home, like, caregivers, and so she was good for the most part. I felt like I could have my own life in college, right? And I'm a workaholic, right? So in high school, I did all the things, sports, chapel committee. I built the sets for the plays. I had a job in high school. I did a lot, right? And then, so I went to college, and I was thinking, all right, I'm going to do all these things, and I'm going to be awesome at them. And I did way too much. I was an athlete. I was really proud. I played volleyball. I was really proud of myself for being an athlete. I had really good grades because I'm a perfectionist. I was, again, on chapel committee, helped organizing. We had chapel in college like 3 days a week, so I helped organize that. I had on-campus jobs. I was a teaching assistant for biology. I was I was a tour guide. New families want to come and visit the college. I was a tour guide. And I was pretty proud of myself for doing all these things. But then slowly, one by one, my life started to fall apart. All these things started to be taken away from me. My grades, this was like my sophomore year. I was also in a relationship. I was also in my first like long-term relationship, so I was so like messed up and like caught up in like what that person thought of me, right? And then slowly, like one by one, sophomore year of college, like my grades, crap. Organic chemistry, no. Grades went down the crapper, and I had a scholarship, and I was like, well, I can't really afford to pay for all college. If I lose a scholarship, I am doomed. My jobs were like overwhelming. I also had an injury, so I was an athlete in high school and the beginning part of college, and long story short, it took them a while to figure out what was going on with my knees, but I learned that I have an autoimmune condition. It's kind of like rheumatoid arthritis, but my joints get really swollen and really painful, and I couldn't play volleyball anymore because volleyball is all about your knees. And I remember and my relationship ended because there was so much mental health problems. He was having issues, and like I was having my own issues, trying to go to counseling, didn't work out. That relationship ended, and I was like, I remember sitting on the couch in my dorm room being like, I don't even know who I am. Like, I do all these things. That's who I am. I do all these things. I am this person's girlfriend. I am that person's tutor. And then I'm like, God, you better say something because I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, God, I'm not leaving this couch until you talk to me and say something. And if I had my old Bible, I'd be able to tell you the verse, but he said, "You're my child, you're my daughter, and I love you." And coming from that childhood background of not being able to be a kid, and I could just rest in like God's arms, and it's okay that I can't pass class and can't be all these things. You mean I'm your child? And so that was huge for me, huge. And that was the other part of calling, where we talk about learning our identity as a child of God. That's what that was for me. And I also had to shed all of these false selves, this false self of being a workaholic and being a perfectionist. I had to shed and let go of all those things because they're always going to let you down. The job is always going to let you down. The investment you put in your house is going to let you down at some point. Other people are going to let you down. My talents, my abilities, my social groups, they are all going to let you down at some points. But God is not letting you down, ever. And I had to train my mind to think that way. And you might think this is funny. It was probably a little weird, but as I was trying to train my mind to think that way, and I went to a Christian college, so there was also all this noise of chapel and Christian things happening. And somebody at some point was studying like what it means to have the mind of Christ and to hand over every idea to God and be like, capture every thought for Christ, right? And so that's literally what I did. I would walk around campus and I was like light as a feather. I was so happy and joyful, and everybody's like, "What happened to you?" And I was like, "Jesus happened to me." But as I was training my mind, I would literally walk around campus, and if something came in my mind that I knew was a lie, something about like, "You're not good enough. You can't even run anymore because your knees are crap. You're going to fail this test." Anytime that like a negative or a false thought from the enemy would come at me about that I'm not a child of God, every time I would say, "Get away from me, Satan." I would verbalize that out loud. And people probably thought I was pretty weird because I'd be, like, they would hear me say that as they're walking down the sidewalk. They're like, "Why is she saying get behind me, Satan?" I really wish I could ask some people what they thought when they heard me say that. But that's literally what I did because that's what I had to do in order to train my mind. That seems weird, right? But do anything you have to get that truth in your mind. And so this grace, this gift, it's already been given to you. It's always existed since the beginning of time, since before you could even choose God or not. It's existed. I'm going to read this piece from Romans 5 again. God's law was given so that all people could see how sinful they were. But as people sinned more and more, God's wonderful grace was all the more abundant. The grace is always going to be more and more than any of the sin, than any of the separation between you and God. So grace is gift, all joy, all peace, all love, all goodness, all faithfulness, all gentleness, all self-control. All those gifts have already been given to you. It's just a matter of, are you going to accept them? They're there. You just need to accept them. That might say that it kind of sounds easy, but I know it's not. I know it's not. Because if you're thinking, God, like, do I trust this? Do I really trust this? And it's okay if you don't know if you trust it or not. It's okay if you don't know, God, I don't know about this Bible. Some things in here I don't know that I believe. I don't know that you're like real because I'm not feeling it right now. It's okay to say those things because God can handle it. God can handle it. And I also had to learn that, like praying like, God, I don't get this right now. I don't understand. This seems really jacked up, some of the things in the Bible. And so you're going to need to help me. You're going to need to help me understand. You're going to need to make my heart soft. You can pray those things. You can. He can take it. And so all of that to say, how does this relate to Shape? So all that happened to me sophomore year. I went home, and I decided to get baptized. Thanksgiving Eve, 2010. And the church I grew up in, it was kind of a tradition thing that people would get baptized sometime in high school. And so for a while, people had been asking me, when are you going to get baptized? When are you going to get baptized? And I would see all the other youth, all my other friends go up and get baptized, and I was the only one that hadn't got baptized yet. But that was intentional because I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this if it's not going to mean anything, right? Like, so I was resisting that pressure, and I finally understood why. And part of me was just being a little like proud and stuck in the mud because I was like, I don't want to do the same thing as everybody else. I'm going to wait. But I realized that I was waiting for a reason because I needed to experience this my sophomore year of college. I needed to come back and really own I am a child of God. And the other thing about being baptized, it was also like, okay, God, like, I understand now, like, I'm learning still, like, I'm a child of God. So now what, God? Like, remember, Jewish gift giving is a two-way street. Okay, God, now what am I supposed to give back to you? What can I possibly give to you, give to the people around me that reflect your grace and your love? And so your salvation is not your own. We are a single family of faith with diverse members. And family, family doesn't happen just by yourself. And it also doesn't happen only with people that look like you or think like you. I've got some family members, I can't understand how they think. But we are all a family of faith. And this looks weird. This looks weird out there, right? It looks weird because there's like politics and there's social circumstances that I can't understand. And it feels like there's all this separation between us and other people. But it's not meant to be that way. We are to look weird just like Jesus looked weird in his culture. And this is also what helps us to not be hypocrites, to not be saying one thing in our mouth and then go and do something that looks completely different out in the world. And if you're thinking, oh no, like I used to think, well, oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Remember, it's not about you. It's not about you and what you're doing. It's about what God is doing in you and through you. And so that's another thing you can pray if you're thinking, God, I don't know what to do. There's no way that I can love this neighbor down the corner because they say some terrible things. I don't know how to love that neighbor. I don't know. It's okay. You can pray, God, I don't know how to do this. You need to teach me. You need to show me. You need to change me somehow so that I can do something. You need to show me what you are doing so that I can just follow. So it's not about you. It's all about what God is doing. We are ultimately bound to one another, and we cannot be true to our identity as children, as part of God's family, without giving a gift back to God, without giving back to God and to others. And so that's more of what we're going to talk about next week. I'm going to pray because I had another thing and I went way over time. We were going to have like a discussion. I can give you the discussion questions if y'all want to talk about. I'm going to pray because we're getting close on time. And if you want to stay and talk together, that would be cool. Awesome. The discussion questions were going to be, you can go to the next slide. I was just going to have us turn in our groups and talk about, hopefully this is somewhat straightforward and not too vulnerable. Talk about what is one new thing that you learned. And if you didn't learn any new thing, that's also okay. But maybe you were reminded of something that you knew, but then you're like, oh, like I need to be reminded of this. So what's one new thing that you learned? What's one question that you still have? Do you still have a question that you need to ask somebody else or you need to ask God? What's one question you still have? And then maybe God is asking you to do something. What is God asking you to do? So that'd be cool if y'all talked about that, but I'm going to pray, and if you got to go, you can go. All right, so let us pray. Nourishing God. Open up something new in us. Open up curiosity or hunger. Open up attentiveness or compassion. Open up the parts of our hearts that need your centering word the most. And then, like yeast and bread, may your love expand in us. We are listening and we are hopeful. Amen. Blessings as you go.